Sometimes the real battlefield isn't made of tanks and missiles, but of promises and alliances. Benjamin Netanyahu believed he'd found the ideal partner in Donald Trump, someone who, like him, saw strength as synonymous with security and power, as a solution to fear. But time has revealed what many overlooked. Every alliance based on convenience comes with a price tag that will eventually pay interest. And now, the Israeli leader finds himself trapped in a trap he himself helped create. As the world watches the conflict in Gaza, a quieter game is being played behind the scenes. A game of power, influence, and political survival. Trump may have left the White House, but his ghost still haunts the Middle East, shaping decisions and causing unpredictable consequences. And Netanyahu, the man accustomed to dominating the board, is beginning to realize that the pieces move on their own when the game is bigger than the player. The dilemma now isn't just military or diplomatic, it's existential. To what extent can a leader maintain control when his own strategy was inspired by someone who always believed in chaos as a method? What happens when the protector becomes the weight that threatens to sink the ship? The answers could change not only Israel's fate, but the balance of power worldwide. So now it's time to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what's coming will surprise you. The Web of Power: How the War in Gaza Became an International Political Game in the World of Geopolitics. Nothing is ever as it seems. Gaza, for example, has long since ceased to be a mere conflict zone, and has become the epicenter of a power struggle between powers that see the Middle East as a platform for global influence. Every missile launched, every statement made, carries more political calculation than emotion. Israel plays for survival and regional hegemony. Iran acts as a shadow and a provocateur. And the United States, well, they see every move as an opportunity to reaffirm who truly dictates the rules of the game. Trump, even outside the Oval Office, remains a figure who moves invisible pieces on this board. His strategy of force over diplomacy has created a new dynamic in the Middle East. More business, fewer promises, more alliances based on convenience rather than ideology. Under his influence, previously unthinkable agreements, such as the Normalization Agreement between Israel and Arab countries, have become reality. But every hastily made alliance comes at a price, and that price began to be exacted when the fire reignited in Gaza, exposing the cracks in a political architecture built in haste. Behind the cameras and official speeches, a silent game is underway. Who truly controls the narrative? While the world's eyes are on the bombings, strategic decisions are being made in Washington, Tehran, Moscow, and even Beijing. The conflict is no longer just about territory. It's now about who will write the next version of history. And that's where Netanyahu's dilemma begins to take shape. A dilemma he may not have even realized he was about to face. Trump and the diplomacy of chaos. The origin of the new American doctrine for the Middle East. Trump has never believed in diplomatic niceties. While past presidents cultivated alliances with rhetoric about democracy and freedom, he preferred a transactional approach. What do you give me in return? Thus was born what many call chaos diplomacy, a policy in which force, money, and expediency outweigh treaties and values. The Abraham Accords are the most visible example of this, uniting Israel and Arab countries not by ideology, but by economic and military interests. This logic shattered old paradigms. Instead of mediation, Trump offered power. Instead of appeasement, he encouraged calculated confrontations. He knew that by reorganizing the Middle East, he was also cementing his image as an unpredictable leader, someone who could both start and end wars with a simple tweet. Chaos, for him, was a tool of control. And, in a way, it worked. For a time, the instability served to bring everyone to the table, including those who swore never to negotiate with Israel. but this doctrine of force created a dangerous dependence. Israel began to act with the confidence of having the American giant always ready to intervene, and that was precisely where the dilemma began. Because when support becomes certainty, the strategy becomes a trap. Netanyahu, who believed he was securing his nation's future, found himself trapped in a web he himself helped weave. And that web would soon begin to tighten. Netanyahu in check. The political price of American dependence. Benjamin Netanyahu always prided himself on being the guardian of Israel's security, the man who could balance war and diplomacy without losing control. But what seemed like self-confidence began to reveal itself as dependence. During the Trump years, he found an ally who spoke his language. Direct, ruthless, and willing to ignore international protocols. This partnership seemed perfect, until the situation changed. When American support became a political crutch, Israel found itself struggling not only against its enemies, but also against the weight of expectations created by this alliance. The truth is that Netanyahu found himself trapped in a dangerous equation. By accepting the prominence Trump offered, he also inherited his unpredictability. Washington's decisions began to dictate the pace of Israeli policy, and any sign of distancing himself from the U.S. generated immediate turmoil within Israel. Many analysts say Netanyahu made American dependence part of his own political identity. And the problem with this is that when the ally changes mood, the local leader pays the price. The relationship that once seemed strategic began to feel like veiled submission, something that, internally, his opponents exploited ferociously. Within Israel, this fragility became even more visible as Gaza returned to the headlines. Israeli society was divided between those who saw Netanyahu as a shield against chaos and those who blamed him for turning the country into a hostage of the U.S. Protests took to the streets, war veterans questioned military decisions, and diplomats warned of growing isolation. The Iron Man began to rust under the weight of his own strategy. And while he tried to keep up appearances, a new threat emerged, not from outside, but from within Israel's borders, the mirror within. Political and social divisions within Israel. Israel has always been a country forged in tension, encircled by enemies, sustained by faith, and driven by a constant sense of existential urgency. But what few expected was that the greatest threat to its stability would come from within. The war in Gaza exposed a deep fissure within Israelis themselves. On one side, those who believe in force as the only language available. On the other, those who call for humanity, ethics, and balance. This division is not new, but under Netanyahu it has taken on almost irreconcilable contours. The national consensus, once based on survival, is now fragmented into ideologies that compete for the soul of the country. On the streets of Tel Aviv, young people demonstrate with signs demanding an end to the violence. In Jerusalem, religious and nationalists demand harsh responses. Veteran soldiers denounce what they call the politicization of war, while hostage families demand humanity. On camera. Israeli society, accustomed to uniting in the face of an external enemy, now faces the painful realization that the enemy may also be in the government's own decisions. This internal rift has become the clearest reflection of Netanyahu's crisis. He is attempting to lead a nation that no longer agrees on what it means to win. This polarization has reached the corridors of power. Generals disagree on military strategies, ministers clash in meetings, and parliament has become a minefield of mutual accusations. Netanyahu, who built his image as the great articulator of Israeli unity, now has to manage a double war, one in Gaza, the other at home. And this internal war is silent, unpredictable, and corrosive. Because when a nation loses confidence in its own leadership, even its victories on the battlefield cease to have the flavor of achievement. And it is precisely in this scenario of uncertainty that the Trump factor reappears, not as an ally, but as a catalyst for a new political impasse. The Trump factor. Between the promise of security and the risk of isolation, Trump has always known how to use fear as a political tool, and Israel was no different. His rhetoric of total security deeply resonated with Israelis, tired of living under constant threat. The promise was simple: strength breeds respect, and respect breeds peace. This vision captivated Netanyahu, who saw it as the perfect validation for his own policies. But what seemed like a solid strategic alliance began to reveal itself as a dangerous pact. The logic of us versus them may work in the short term, but it creates walls in the long run. And in Israel's case, these walls aren't just concrete. They're diplomatic, economic, and moral. Europe, which for decades served as a counterweight to American influence, began to distance itself. Former allies like France and Germany began openly questioning Israeli actions in Gaza. International organizations stepped up their criticism, and even historic allies like the United Kingdom adopted a cooler tone. Trump's rhetoric of "whoever is not with us is against us" transformed Israel into a symbol of resistance, but also of isolation. Forceful diplomacy, when applied without measure, exacts a price. It drains bridges, closes doors, and gradually turns the ally into a loner. Netanyahu, by following this playbook, ended up reproducing the same paradox that consumed Trump, achieving momentary victories at the cost of growing global loneliness. Internally, his image as a strong leader kept him in power. Externally, it transformed him into a controversial figure. And the tighter the diplomatic noose tightened, the more he clung to American support, even if that support had changed in face and tone after Trump's departure from the White House. He was like a gambler who had bet all his chips on a partner who had already left the table. Now, the question was no longer whether he would win, but how much would this victory cost? And with the next move, the board would begin to reveal its most unpredictable consequences. The future board. What might happen if Netanyahu follows or breaks with Trump's strategy? Netanyahu's future seems like a chess game played against time. If he decides to follow Trump's strategy, it reaffirms his image as an inflexible leader, willing to sacrifice diplomatic relations for the sake of national security. This decision would please Israel's most conservative wing and Republican allies in the United States, but it would deepen the country's international isolation. Economic sanctions could intensify, trade agreements with Europe would be threatened, and the moral weight of the actions in Gaza would reach historic proportions. It's the kind of choice that wins immediate applause and eternal condemnation. On the other hand, breaking with the Trumpist playbook would mean reopening diplomatic channels, restoring bridges with the West, and attempting to rebuild Israel's image as a pragmatic democracy, not a besieged fortress. But this would require something Netanyahu has always avoided: publicly acknowledging that the era of absolute force has limits. It would be a step of political humility, and at the same time, an act of strategic courage. The problem is that his domestic allies, accustomed to the rhetoric of confrontation, would see this shift as weakness. And a leader who bases his power on the perception of strength cannot afford to appear vulnerable, not even for a second. Ultimately, Netanyahu's dilemma is more philosophical than military. He must choose between controlling the game or reinventing the rules. The first option maintains power but consumes it. The second liberates it but exposes it. And perhaps this is precisely the greatest lesson of this impasse. Understanding that in geopolitics, true power lies not in winning every battle, but in knowing which wars are still worth fighting. As the world watches, the board continues to move silently. And the question hangs in the air like a suspended piece. Is Netanyahu the player, or the piece being moved by invisible hands? Ultimately, the story of Netanyahu and Trump is a powerful reminder that all power has a price, and that alliances that promise immediate security often hide the cost of dependence. A true leader is not one who dominates the battlefield, but one who has the courage to change strategy when they realize the game is no longer the same. The world is watching a new chapter being written before our eyes, and every move in the Middle East has repercussions in every direction. Economics, politics, and even how nations define their values. And perhaps this is the big question hanging in the air. To what extent can a ruler ally himself with chaos without being swallowed by it? What happens when the search for security turns into isolation? These are dilemmas that transcend borders and speak to the fate of any nation that trades dialogue for power and strategy for vanity. Now I want to invite you to reflect. If you were in Netanyahu's shoes, would you continue playing Trump's game, or would you try to redefine the rules? Leave your opinion in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Here, you'll always find analyses that help you see beyond the headlines, understanding what's really behind the decisions that shape the world.